Hello, good morning. We thank everyone for attending the 27th UFJF Computer Science Week. This event is organized by the Department of Computer Science, GETS, Café das Minas, and Code Empresa Júnior with the support of the Institute of Exact Sciences. This event is sponsored by Levchi, Rerun Systems, Engineering, and Bitica Analytics. Any questions you might have during the lecture can be posted in the chat, and they'll be answered as soon as possible at the end. The link to the attendance form will be posted in the chat in the end of the activity. We will begin the lecture entitled Teaching Cybersecurity by Doing, Real Tools, Real Labs, Real Learning. The lecture will be given by Mike Wilkes. Now an introduction. Former CISO for Major League Soccer, Mike has built, transformed, and protected ASCAP, Marvel, Inc. Bank, CME Group, Sony, Macy's, and many other global brands. Recognized in 2020 as a technology pioneer, he provides through leadership on cyber resilience in the oil and gas industry, as well as quantum security working groups. A featured speaker at Black Hat, Gartner, GovWare, SecureWorld and SANS, he's an adjunct professor who teaches cybersecurity and risk management at NYU and Columbia while advising several startups. Now I will pass the floor to Mike.
Thank you, Gabriela, and thank you for this opportunity to present some of my thoughts and some of my work as the CISO for Aikido Security, a Belgian-based startup that is offering lots of really great tools to help protect code. And so one of the things I wanted to do before getting into the slides and into the agenda is just sort of talk about the why here. So as an adjunct professor at NYU and teaching IT risk management at Columbia University, I think it's important to give back at this stage of my career. I've been pretty fortunate over the years to have had some pretty cool titles, and I'll show some of those logo in a minute. And so the idea is that Aikido has put together some labs, some hands-on labs and how-to documents, and they're growing. I have a planned set of about 2 of them that I'll be building out, and I've started the first couple of them already for people to use in their cybersecurity courses, also in their computer science classes, where people are learning development and secure development lifecycle. So with that said, I think I just get started with the next slide. Let me jump into my presenter and pull up the title. So this is a couple of the logos that I like to advertise, I guess you could say, as I do these types of presentations. And in this case, you can see I'm a graduate of Stanford University. I have my master's degree in philosophy of education, actually. And I went to the University of Wisconsin-Madison for my undergraduate, also studied philosophy. In 2002, I wrote a book for Cisco Press, which is for a certification called Internet Solution Specialist. But that certification doesn't exist anymore. And so it was a fun project. I think it was like 584 pages and a certification study guide. So I got my ISBN back in 2002. One of the feathers in my cap was working in San Francisco during the dot-com bubble. And this is before the bubble burst. Of course, I was on the team that gave birth to Starbucks.com. So 1998, building and doing what would be called DevOps now, but back then we just called it WebOps because it was mostly, the World Wide Web. And you couldn't order a latte online back in 1998, but you could certainly browse the website, and that was all the rage, of course, with Web 1.0 and e-commerce sites. I also led the team that gave birth to PlayStation.com for the PS2 back in 2000. And some of the other sites that I gave birth to back then as the head of the team at Organic Online was Macy's.com, e-commerce, also Blockbuster.com, and gave them their first website. If only Blockbuster knew that Be Kind Rewind was not the future, they might still be relevant they're not much of a concern anymore in terms of video, tape, VHS rentals, and things like that, DVD rentals. Let's see. Then after 5 rounds of layoffs during the bursting of the bubble, I was still, last man standing. I survived all 5 rounds of layoffs. So at that point, though, I decided to quit and move to Europe. And so I lived and worked in Amsterdam for 11 years, where I got to build and design and host and launch Rabobank's direct banks, which was, I think, New Zealand, Australia, Ireland, England, Netherlands, Belgium. And I also built the ING's DR infrastructure, the Nederlandse Bank, the Dutch bank, pretty much held a gun to the head of ING and said, you have 1 data center and it's below sea level. And if it goes offline, the Dutch economy is going to be seriously impacted. And so they had to solve that problem. So the company I worked for in Amsterdam, Schuberg Phyllis, was tasked with building a second data center for ING so that they had fault tolerance. Then let's see, moved back to the US. I also did some other work building energy management systems that control power plants and things like that. Moved back to the US in 2013 and ran the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, the CME Group's enterprise server platform. So again, more of a DevOps, hands-on technical role than cybersecurity. Although I must say that I had to pay attention to security. Back in 1998, when we were giving birth to Starbucks' first website, there just was no CISO title back then, Chief Information Security Officer. But anyway, CME Group, about 10,000 servers made up our 5 data centers, and $250 million in contracts traded on the exchange. So that's what's referred to as a CFI, a systemically important financial institution. And it was there that I gained the nickname, the GIS Whisperer. GIS is a common 3-letter acronym for Global Information Security Team. And so it was there that I started to really, I think, pay more attention to cybersecurity as a potential future role and title, and to aspire to become CISO. After the CME Group, I worked at AQR Capital, which had about 184 billion assets under management. I don't know if you've ever seen the American TV show Billions, but it is about hedge funds, and AQR Capital is a hedge fund. And I often remark that what you see in those TV episodes is not really fiction. It's a lot like what it's like to work for a hedge fund in the US. After that tour of duty, I switched to the music industry and became the first ever CISO for ASCAP, the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers. I'm a jazz musician. I'm a ASCAP member. I love to play music. I play drums, jazz, and becoming the first CISO in the history of a 100-year-old organization. ASCAP was founded in 1914. It was great to build that security program and to be able to do music and cybersecurity at the same time. ASCAP is a $1.8 billion revenue organization, and it's a member not-for-profit organization. So all the people that compose songs, not the mechanical or streaming rights that were decimated by piracy and Napster and Spotify and things like that. But this is the composers' royalties, so the people that wrote the songs. So imagine Justin Timberlake, Mariah Carey, Beyonce, Lin-Manuel Miranda, anyone that writes music gets a royalty when their music is played. And so that's the performing rights royalties that we managed at ASCAP. Then after ASCAP, I made a pivot into working in more media and entertainment, and I became the head of DevOps at Marvel, where I like to joke it was my job to keep Iron Man safe. I eventually took over enterprise architecture, the head of enterprise architecture, and the head of cybersecurity. Definitely a very cool job, a very cool place to work. Marvel Entertainment, based in New York. I would walk in the office and everyone would be watching movies and playing games and reading comics, and that was their job. And so it was my job to keep them safe. So I did that for 2 years, actually, and enjoyed my time working for the empire, as I like to call it. Why? Because Disney bought Marvel in 2009. So, the empire, given that Disney owns the Star Wars franchise these days. I began teaching at NYU in 2020. So I've been teaching there 5-6 years now, cybersecurity. graduate student program. And my next CISO role was Security Scorecard, which is that purple hexagon there, which is a security ratings company that scans the internet using Nmap, if you're familiar with the tool, and giving everyone a letter grade based on what types of visible exposures and misconfigurations and vulnerabilities are there that can be found. So imagine, you know, OSINT, it's called, open source intelligence. And so when a hacker is looking at a website as a target or as a potential victim, they do scanning, they do reconnaissance. And so that's sort of the same thing that security scorecards do, with about 12 million scorecards. So you just type in a domain name and you get to see what visible risk there is. Then, as mentioned, in 2020, I was nominated to the World Economic Forum as a technology pioneer. I've since worked for the last 5-6 years with them as well. And most recently was asked to join the Quantum Security Working Group and writing white papers and case studies that influence policy and government at an international level. Then for a short period, I was the CISO for a healthcare startup in California called Lark Health. Started a small business here in New York called the Security Agency, which is that shield, but that didn't last long. The company that was financing it decided that they wanted to just go back to doing physical security instead of branching into cyber. Started teaching at Columbia University this spring, IT risk management, and then my most recent title was Major League Soccer. I was the first CISO in the history of the 30-year organization, and soccer is going to be taking off in North America with the World Cup in 2026, but it's already a large concern. $2 billion revenue organization. And I resigned from that role in February. So that's what brought me to Aikido, the Belgian startup that I work for now. But anyway, these are just some of the logos, not all of them, but some of them. So I have a pretty, like I said, fortunate path over the years, working in lots of different brands, lots of different organizations. But enough about me. Let's dive into the agenda. All right, so we have a little bit of education because I am an educator. I like to talk a little bit about CISOs, Chief Information Security Officers, and how we're not all the same. There are different types of CISOs, and so I want to expand and share some thoughts on that. But then diving into cloud security and what Aikido is using and doing with its platform. And how we share it with educators to incorporate into their classrooms and into their teaching, and to do this at no cost. We do this as a means of giving back, but also to make sure people are aware of our tools and our capabilities to help protect and do code scanning. So SAST and DAST, if you're familiar with those acronyms, static application security testing is SAST. DAST is dynamic application security testing, so runtime. Also, software composition analysis, SCA. Those are some of the capabilities of the platform, and we'll see them over the course of my session with you today. So the first piece is going to be step away from the defaults. We also do, obviously, cloud security posture management, CSPM, and continuous endpoint or threat exposure management, CTEM. And cloud is not more secure or less secure than your workloads in your business in an on-prem data center. It's a different shape of risk, and it's not secure by default. And that's one of the things I like to criticize, actually, about some of the defaults, which is why I have this title, Step Away from the Defaults. And that's really incumbent on us as security professionals and developers of infrastructure and software and services, to make sure that we understand the shared responsibility and how we too need to make sure that our applications are not easy to be breached or misconfigured or exposed. After stepping away from the defaults, I have a short topic of all your IAM are belong to us. IAM is a three-letter acronym. There's a lot of three-letter acronyms in cybersecurity, of course. This one is Identity and Access Management. And here I'm making a reference to a game, which was a Japanese game that was part of a meme that was called All Your Base Are Belong to Us. Anyway, so it just basically is stressing the importance of human secrets and non-human secrets, service accounts, shared access accounts, for agentic AI, APIs, other types of application services. Then I'll explode and expand on the shared responsibility model, and then then I get to wrap it up with why teachers are choosing Aikido and talk about some of the ways of engaging with our platform as an educator or as a student. And then lastly, getting started setting up teams, and then some time at the end for Q&A. So I think the main message here is that teachers can integrate these real-world security challenges into your courses and help students, learn by doing and using a professional grade platform that they can use when they start their job. All right, so different CISO types. So there is no single type of Chief Information Security Officer. We are not fungible or replaceable. We're not all cut from the same cloth, if you've heard that phrase. CISOs are a combination of being an attorney, because we have to read lots of legal documents with breach notifications and contracts with third parties, especially when you're a vendor CISO like myself, a Chief Information Security Officer that works to protect a cybersecurity vendor and cybersecurity company. We also need to be, of course, business leaders and speak, to the board of directors and speak with the senior leadership team and the C-suite. And I have to admit, not all CISOs are terribly good at that business level talk. A lot of them are more technical in their background, and they don't really have the ability to speak. Like, I like to pretend I'm talking to my parents when I'm talking to executives and talking to the board or talking to regulators. You need to dumb it down, really. I'm not insulting these people. I'm just saying that their technical depth is not like mine, for example. I'm a very hands-on technical CISO, but not everyone is, of course. And then, of course, we have to be cheerleaders. We have to encourage people to do the right thing and to develop code, in a secure manner, and to encourage people to not click on emails and phishing tests and things like that. We have to be a diplomat. By this, I mean we often only have a few headcount that report to us directly in medium-sized organizations. Larger organizations, there could be a lot of direct or indirect reports. But in general, we need to have lines of influence towards finance, legal, HR, engineering, and marketing, and all business functions, really, and all department leads. And so in that case, I think of it as diplomacy and influence to help them be security conscious and to be security aware and to be resilient, to think about security from time to time. Even though some of us have the word in our title, security is everyone's responsibility. And so that diplomacy function, I think, is a good way to build a good culture in an organization. It's not just about your tool set, which we can change out, get rid of Carbon Black and install CrowdStrike, for example, as an endpoint tool. But really, we need to focus on mindset and how people think about security. We need to be innovators. A lot of us are being asked to understand and to figure out how to protect, AI as it comes into the business, and to find ways to put guardrails around the use of AI, and to stop, potential breaches that can be caused by prompt injection and things like that. So we have to be innovators and technologists and entrepreneurs. Private investigators. We need to do insider risks and investigations into, account takeovers, business email compromise. Sometimes we have to worry about nation-state threat actors that are working in our companies as fraudulent employees. I think the statistic that I heard at a conference on identity just a couple of months ago was that there were over 500,000 fraudulent employees working in the Fortune 500. That's a lot of insiders. Some of them would be North Korean DevOps engineers that are using fake identities and working remote. Some of them are using laptop farms that are hosted in the US. There was a woman in Arizona, I think it was maybe Phoenix, and she had 60 laptops in her home, and they were all company-issued laptops that had been sent there by the companies, many major telecommunications and software and highly visible, well-known brands, and they were remotely being accessed through another internet connection. And the workers were in North Korea, and they were earning a good $200,000-$300,000 US a year salary, and using that money to fund the North Korean weapons program. So that laptop farm was taken down and publicized in a story that talked about how she was being given, I think, 10% of all the money that all of her fake workers were, or remote workers. So anyway, fascinating private investigator aspects to cybersecurity and CISO work. We have to be a salesperson. Everyone works for sales at the end of the day. Everyone needs to be able to appear at a conference like I did yesterday here in Philadelphia. I'm usually based in New York, but at the moment I'm dialed in from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where I was talking at a CISO summit and talking with colleagues of mine that are cybersecurity professionals and leaders at TikTok or JetBlue and other organizations, large concerns. Really fascinating. Love getting together, with these other colleagues. Teacher, of course, we have to teach people, how to do this job. We have to have deputies, deputy CISOs. We have to have directors of governance, risk, and compliance. We have to build a team and create, these roles and this depth of knowledge. Of course, technologist is one of the aspects that a lot of us are quite good at, myself included, if I say so myself. And of course, a warfighter, because nation states are engaged in hybrid cyberkinetic warfare, where software can be used to kill people. You can override the systems on a power plant, safety systems for oil refinery, and cause loss of life. So those are some of the different types of CISOs based on the role. The other thing I wanted to point out, I did this a while ago. Maybe the numbers have changed a little bit. But I wanted this slide to quantify just how hard it is to be a good CISO, to be well-rounded and to be successful. So I think CISOs are drawn from a small pool of talent that has breadth and depth, hard skills and soft skills. Helen Patton, she's a CISO. She posted a list of 10 CISO types on LinkedIn about a year ago. In my slide notes, I have a link to her article. I'm happy to share my slides with you when this presentation is finished. I have a QR code that you can scan. It is a mail to tag, so you're not getting any malware, and it's not a risk to scan that code. And I will send you a copy of the deck, which has all of the slides and speaker notes with some of the hyperlinks for the source of some of this information. So I did a search on Sales Navigator, and I did a snapshot that there are about 32,000 people with the title CISO globally in LinkedIn. But only 12,000 of those have a tenure of greater than 2 years. What does that mean? That means CISOs get fired a lot, and they get fired when someone clicks on an email, and that's unfortunate. But the average tenure for a chief information security officer is 18 months. And so anyone that's had the job for more than 2 years is helping raise the bar and hopefully doing a good job with their program. But in general, I think it's an unappreciated role. Even though we have a C in our title, we're a C-suite. I think we've been invited to sit at the table so that we can be thrown under the bus when something bad happens. And that's unfortunate. Like I said, a lot of companies believe that all CISOs are the same. And I'm trying to point and make the case that we're not. The CISO for a 10-person crypto startup in New York or California or Miami is not the same kind of talent as maybe the chief information security officer for NASA, for example. Different skill set, different scale, different understanding of risk. Of the CISOs in North America, geographically limited, I would say there's 9,000 that came back from that Sales Navigator search. And of those, only 1,500 are actually active on LinkedIn. So a lot of professionals prefer to stay below the radar, almost to not even have a social media presence. Why? Because it can be used against them. Social engineering research, people can do impersonations and learn when you're traveling. For myself, being a internet sort of thought leader, it's not an option. So I'd rather own my profile and publish it and author it myself with my own posts on LinkedIn. But of those 9,000, I'd say about half of them are probably aspirational CISOs, meaning they put the title in their LinkedIn profile, but they're not really a CISO yet, maybe. They want to become one, and so they kind of fake it until they make it. Then I'd say almost half of those are imposters, meaning they're not technically qualified to be a CISO. They didn't have the background. A perfect example of this would be the CISO for United Group, who had no cybersecurity experience at all. For some reason, he was given the job, hired into the role at this multi-billion-dollar healthcare organization. And they had this breach, right? One of the companies that they own Change Healthcare, had a breach that ended up impacting, I think, over 90 million users and Americans with the inability to access their prescriptions and to have all of their information disclosed and leaked online as a part of a ransomware attack that really damaged the entire American economy for a while, and the healthcare sector was really thrown into disarray. It's not a good day when your CEO for United Healthcare is called to the White House and asked to explain why people can't get their medicine because your downstream acquisition company, I think it's United Healthcare Group owns Optum. Optum owns Change Healthcare. And I think Optum bought Change Healthcare for like $13 billion a few years ago. But they had never actually integrated all of their security monitoring and security posture tools. And that was one of the reasons why during a time of acquisition and change, companies are often at risk and their weaknesses are exposed because they haven't harmonized their endpoint management. They haven't installed, for example, maybe CrowdStrike or other tools on their endpoints yet. And that leads to risk and breach. But anyway, so those are some of my thoughts, that there's actually only 2,000 interesting CISOs in North America that are actually doing the job and have these different responsibilities. In terms of CISO types and cloud governance, I think each CISO needs visibility into their cloud. And there's almost no company now that doesn't have some type of cloud footprint, whether it's just your Microsoft online email exchange services or SharePoint or Microsoft Word or Google, G Suite, Workspace for files and emails, or Oracle even, I guess, and Amazon, of course, is a cloud service provider. Everyone has some degree of footprint. I think most companies are hybrid cloud anyway, or multi-cloud these days. They have more than one cloud service provider that makes up their infrastructure. But these are some of the CISOs that came out of the list that Donna Ross created at a conference, SecureWorld, here in Philadelphia earlier this year, where I gave a keynote talking about third-party risk. And so I loved her list, and so I captured it here, and I threw in one more item at the bottom, the imposter CISO. But there are different types of CISOs with different functions. So not only are we, having a very wide range of requirements and skills that we need to bring to the cloud and to the internet, there's technical CISOs, of course. These are deep, like myself, deep on technical and infrastructure, come from an infrastructure background, and have focused on cybersecurity myself the last 6 or 7 years. All right, I think that's a TikTok meme that's going around. Not sure if it's popular in Brazil, but it is definitely in the US. And then compliance focused CISO. So this is the person that comes from like a GRC, governance, risk and compliance, writing policy documents, compliance frameworks. There's a lot of paperwork involved in being a CISO, or at least managing a cybersecurity program, because you have regulatory requirements and documentation and reviews and audits all the time. Some CISOs are strategic, business oriented. They align with the business objectives, and they're very successful in that regard, because the more you can align with the business and its sense of direction and velocity and features and functionality for what they're offering their clients and customers, the less of a cost center you will appear to be. Your security program will be aligned with business objectives, and it'll be looked at as a strategic enabler, right? A differentiator. You have better security than your competitor. Transformational CISOs, these are the ones that are brought in to create cultural change. And this happens every couple of years. In some banks, for example, they just sort of clean house, right? Or a hedge fund. Point72, for example, has an open CISO role right now. Their previous CISO had been there for about 3-4 years. And so a new chief technology officer comes in, and they want to bring in their friends, and they want to bring in their posse of talent and help them build and replicate a program that they had created successfully elsewhere. And oftentimes that's what management wants. They hire a CISO because they know that they can bring in a talent pool of friends that they've worked with before that they trust. The same kind of thing with technology officers or CIOs, chief information officers. They often bring in a CISO that they know they can work well with. And so that happens, like I said, the changing of the guard, the purge of leadership. And that's what keeps us at like less than 2 years of average tenure. Then you have the crisis and risk management CISO, usually hired post-breach or after an incident. I remember hearing somebody talk about a sequence of compensation for a company that had been breached. Prior to the breach, the CISO was paid something like $450,000 a year. And then they got breached and they got all serious. And they're like, oh my gosh, we're going to have to bring in a real talented, battle-hardened CISO that can get us through this period after the breach. And so they pay the next person $1.2 million. And I would love, obviously, to be the second CISO in that sequence, and to not be the one that got fired that was underpaid. 450K, you might think is a pretty big salary. It is, but if you look at some of the compensation surveys that are published by Hitch Partners and others on the internet, you can see that there's a wide range of pay. Some CISOs get only maybe 100, 110,000 a year, depending if they're working for a nonprofit or a smaller business. And anyway, so it's quite a wide range of comp. Operational CISO. These are for the large organizations that are fairly in a steady state. They have a good security program. They invest in their security tools and in their people and in their processes. And so that operational CISO just keeps the lights running kind of thing. Then there are, of course, fractional CISOs. Given that there's only 2,000 interesting, talented CISOs in North America, I think the need is for maybe 8,000. Fractional CISOs or virtual CISOs, part-time, are starting to come into play. I was a fractional CISO for Lark.com, the healthcare company, for example. I was working 50% of the time because they couldn't afford my regular full salary. And so it was fine for me to help them build that program as a part-time fractional CISO. Then there's the field CISO. This is more of a consulting advisory role. I have some of those functions right now with Aikido. I had them as well when I was at Security Scorecard, which is to help drive sales, right? To go out and be a thought leader and to make presentations like this one for the Security Week, and to make presentations like I did yesterday here in Philadelphia, and to make presentations for the major conferences, RSA, Black Hat, SANS, and things like that. Which I, of course, have done a lot of over the years. And then lastly, the imposter CISO, security in name only, no real substance. And then, of course, besides working in different industries, having a wide range of responsibilities, and then having these multiple types of CISOs, each one of us is on a different stage of their actual development as a CISO. And so I think of this, and this is a term that I've created, you might not find it anywhere else just yet, the CISO development lifecycle, similar to the software or system development lifecycle. Everything is in a phase of growth and change. So not only are there different types, of course, and so I talk about aspiring and becoming CISO. That's one phase. When I teach at NYU, one summer I had 104 students in my class, and a lot of them were getting their master's degree in the Cyber Fellows program. A lot of them were working as a deputy CISO or a business information security officer, a BISO, it's called. They wanted to level up. They wanted to get the title, to get the increased compensation, and to move their career forward. So that's what I mean by aspire and become a CISO. That's the sort of beginning phase. Then after you've got the title for the first time, which is a bit of a chicken and the egg problem, given that a lot of people only want to hire a CISO that has had the job and title before. So how do you get that first title? That's really, a mystical, different paths, of course, to ascending to the title of CISO and becoming the chief information security officer for a company. But the grow and broaden your skills phase is, I think, what a lot of folks need, because maybe they come from one particular background. Like I said, governance, risk, and compliance is a common path to the title. Other folks actually work in what you might call physical security, right? There's a lot of folks that work in the military, for example, that become security officers or chief security officers. So information security officer, CSO. And they've got great training, on physical security and protection, avoidance of harm. That's what I like to think of as our product, actually, as information security professionals. What do we do? Well, it's not all about encryption, and it's not all about password managers and things like that. In general, I think the personal product is the avoidance of harm, to try to invest in people and process and tools to avoid bad things from happening. And I always put tools last. People and process is more important. And then, of course, after you've grown and broadened your skills, then you want to achieve and create teams, and you want to create a legacy. You want to have folks that follow on in your footsteps. Succession planning. Who's going to be the CISO after you? Especially given the fact that you're going to be an at-will employee, and you may be dismissed after a breach, and maybe given a severance package, but maybe not. You might actually be sued by the company, which happens, in many cases with CISOs, or investigated, right, by the SEC, as what happened with Tim Brown at SolarWinds, for example. But I know Tim, and it was not his fault that the company was breached. It was more of a resource allocation problem by the board and management, because they just didn't have enough people to patch and update their software. And that's how they got compromised. And that's how SolarWinds ended up becoming a massive supply chain attack example. So it's not Tim's fault. Or even Joe Sullivan at Uber. He was investigated and charged, for cover-up and conspiracy for the breach that he worked as an incident at Uber. But anyway, I won't dive into that much right now. But we do want to create legacy, at least I do. I want to know how many CISOs I've given birth to, so to speak. How many have I trained in my classes at NYU? How many have I brought into the field through the classes that I teach at Columbia, or the startups that I advise? And then lastly, I think, and this is the phase I believe I'm in right now, which is to reflect and give back to the community. This is where you might become a teacher, like I said, where you might become an advisor to a board, publicly traded or private companies. These are the kinds of things that happen, as you reach the end of a 40-plus year career abusing computers, as I have for the last 30 or 40 years. I like to think of myself as a computer abuser. So the shared responsibility model is, of course, an important theme in this entire education approach to securing cloud application services and teaching people how to do this, whether it's at the university or if it's in a small micro certification program. A lot of universities are switching to certifications and micro certifications. I put together a class for NYU that was a 6-week elective that was a part of their CISO certification program. So this is not a diploma, program like a master's degree or a PhD. This was a 9-month CISO certification program. And the class I created was on threat intelligence and cybersecurity analytics, quantify risk, using security scorecard ratings and things like that. But anyway, the shared responsibility model, you have your cloud service provider and you have your customer, and we each have an element to play in securing the services and keeping them available and keeping them, secure and uncompromised, right? The integrity of the system. There's a triad that's used in talking about information security. It is the pillars of InfoSec, essentially. CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Those are the 3 major areas of work that all cybersecurity professionals have to pay attention to. And a lot of it, people just think about the confidentiality element and encryption and things like that. But really, a lot of CISOs are responsible for the availability of their infrastructure, and in conjunction with the IT management, of course, whether it's cloud or on-prem data centers with servers that you own and rack and stack yourselves. There's really a lot of folks that are responsible for business continuity planning and disaster recovery that will often fall on the shoulders of a CISO in smaller organizations that don't have a dedicated headcount for that, for example. Third-party risk, supply chain risk, vendor dependencies. Everyone has them, and everyone gets surprised. For example, when Amazon has an outage, as they did on Monday, and it was just mostly US East, one as the region, but a disproportionate percentage of the entire internet stops working when Amazon has a bad day. The last time they had a major outage, I think it was probably 2021. And it was fascinating to watch, all of the sites and services that stopped working, including Canvas. Canvas is a learning management system that Columbia University uses. And a lot of people couldn't have classes on that Monday because of the dependencies on the third party, aka the cloud service provider. And people that run mission critical or dependent services for other companies on Amazon, right? So it wasn't just Amazon's outage, it was the companies that have all their eggs in one basket, meaning all of their services run in just one region. And when that region is having a bad day, then all of their services stop working. I think third-party risk attack surface is always going to be everyone's largest exposure. And that's something that we have a capability of informing and providing visibility into with our scanning capabilities at Aikido. But I'll get to that in a minute. One thing I did want to talk about, which is this future risk concept. Let me jump back here. Future risk post-quantum cryptography. I think I mentioned, that I'm on the World Economic Forum Quantum Security Working Group. We've published a quantum security readiness toolkit, financial services approaches. Right now, there's an energy and utility initiative that I'm working on quantum application uses in the energy sector for secure communications and things like that. But this future risk, there's no such thing as quantum incident response. So I wrote an article in CSO Online magazine that came out earlier this month about the non-existence of quantum incident response. There is no such thing. Why is that? Because you can't see it. It's a silent boom, so to speak. So there's basically people that are stealing encrypted traffic right now, and they can't decrypt it, but they know they'll be able to decrypt it later when a cryptographically relevant quantum computer is built. Right now, most of the quantum computers that we're aware of publicly have maybe 1,000 to maybe 4,000 qubits. Qubits are the things that make up a quantum computer. They're different than bits you're using classical computers, which are binary, right? They're ones and zeros. A qubit is more complicated than that. And they need to build maybe a 20 million qubit quantum computer in order to break RSA encryption, for example, and to be able to read all of the secret communications that are happening on encrypted connections, using RSA 2048 and AES, Advanced Encryption Standard. But anyway, so the idea is that people are storing encrypted traffic now so they can decrypt it later. What happens would be like a BGP hijack. I'm not sure if there's a bunch of network engineers listening to this right now or watching the recording later. But in general, BGP is a very trusting protocol for network traffic. It stands for Border Gateway Protocol. And what happens, and this happens like several thousand times a year now, the BGP routing tables are advertised from anyone operates a large presence of IP addresses and network infrastructure on the internet. And they say, I know how to get your packets to this IP address in like 5 hops. You should send all your packets my way. And so someone does this intentionally or mistakenly fat fingers a BGP route. And suddenly your traffic, like for me, in New York, going to log into Wells Fargo or Bank of America to check my bank balance, the traffic is being routed through like Iceland and Belarus and through Russia, or it's being routed through China and Hong Kong on its way to the servers, that might be in California, for example. It's very scenic routing happening, and it's not 4 or 5 hops, but they advertise it as if it is 4 or 5 network hops. And so all the traffic just goes there because it's a very trusting, naive protocol that was invented years ago when the internet was put together. Anyway, so there's these BGP hijacks that are happening, which means people can store a copy of all the packets that pass through their network and save them and decrypt them later. So how do we mitigate this risk? We need to adopt post-quantum cryptography, PQC. And these algorithms have just been tested. NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, released 4 candidates for their round 4 of testing. Unfortunately, 2 of the 4 PQC encryption algorithm candidates have already been broken. One of them by a single core classical computer. So it's hard to come up with really good math that is going to be able to resist or be resilient against quantum computer attacks and quantum security risks. And of course, the preparation for all of this lies with developers, not just CISOs and vendors. It's not like you can just go flip a switch, and say, okay, we're using these algorithms now and everything's good. A lot of work has to be done to migrate, and it'll take 5 to 10 years for everyone to get onto these new algorithms, just as it took 5 to 10 years for folks to switch for the payment card industry from SHA-1 to SHA-2 or from TLS version, SSL version 2 to switch to TLS version 1.2 and higher, right? TLS 1.3 transport layer security. That took about 5 to 10 years as well. And the idea is that in 5 to 10 years from now, someone will have built a cryptographically relevant quantum computer that can break all this asymmetric encryption. Some more details in there, but Aikido has put together a website. If you go to quantum.aikido.io, our regular website is at aikido.dev. Here we host a simple web page. You put in the URL and we'll check for you to see if you support post-quantum cryptography, because you need to support TLS 1.3 and then interrogate which ciphers it supports. And so it's a little more complicated than just scanning to see what protocols it speaks. All right, so let's dive into some of the problems that are solved with tools like Aikido. And I'm not necessarily saying these are the only tools out there that do this. There are open source tools. We actually use some of them under the hood that we've modified and created a fork, our own version of it, to provide this type of scanning. But in general, my major admonition, my major advice to anyone working on the internet is to step away from the defaults. Your cloud infrastructure is a living, breathing thing that morphs and it drifts over time. And so what are the basic misconfigurations for cloud? The defaults are not good. Logging is not turned on. If you live in Amazon, CloudTrail is turned on by default, but not for everything. And it's only retaining the logs and the events and the trails, as they're called, for 90 days. And a lot of organizations work, especially regulated organizations like finance and banking and critical infrastructure, they need to keep logs for longer than 90 days. And unless you went in and extended the data lifecycle and retention period, you're not doing that, right? So there's logging gaps. There are missing configurations that leave blind spots in monitoring or in incident response. When you investigate a breach, it's nice to have logs. When SolarWinds happened, hundreds of organizations got breached, NVIDIA, as well as the Department of Energy, 17 attorney general's offices for the US, and lots and lots of companies, including FireEye, right? FireEye was the company that helped us all learn that SolarWinds happened because they got breached, they realized it, and then they published and disclosed, hey, we got breached. Really by APT 29, Cozy Bear. APT stands for Advanced Persistent Threat. They're given these names and numbers. Cozy Bear is the name that I think CrowdStrike used to them, if I remember correctly. Anyway, it's a Russian threat actor, and they had infected SolarWinds' monitoring software with a backdoor that allowed them to exfiltrate data and to take over infrastructure and steal information, passwords, and to do all sorts of bad things. And that was very clever in the sense that it would infect a workstation when someone updated their SolarWinds software and all of the agents and infrastructure that it monitors. And then it would sit for 2 weeks and do nothing. It was what we call low and slow. It wanted to stay below the radar, and it wanted to move very slowly so as not to trigger behavioral monitoring endpoint tools that say like, hey, this virus put up and now it's trying to talk to the Windows registry and it's trying to encrypt all the files on the file system. That's not low and slow. That's high and fast, or loud and fast. And a lot of organizations like Scattered Spider are functioning in that way, threat actors. They don't care to be clever and to try to remain undetected. They're going to do a smash and grab. They're going to try to get all the interesting stuff they can out of an infrastructure quickly, like within 72 hours. Scattered Spider and Lapsus are in that category. Anyway, logging gaps, got to have logs. A lot of the people that got hit with SolarWinds didn't have logging turned on even. And so they couldn't even tell that they were still owned or whether they were still owned and infected by the Russian threat actors. So the FBI would go to these companies and they'd say, we see packets coming out of your network that are going to known command and control servers for SolarWinds breach and for Cozy Bear's infrastructure. Please let us help you get them out. And people are like, wow, we didn't even realize it. Default settings, there's a lot of bad defaults. I'll talk about that for the next couple of slides. You would think that you shouldn't have to harden a server. You should have to soften it, right? It should have a good default, a good hardened, secure configuration by the moment it's born as a server or as a service. But unfortunately, that's not been the philosophy or the approach. We're expected to come in and raise up the security posture of these servers. So think of them as like stem cells, right? They could be anything. They could be a web server, they could be a database server. And instead of being secure by default, they're kind of idle. They have all sorts of services running on them that they don't need to. They have all these possibilities of what they might become. They might become a stem cell, might become part of a liver, part of a lung, part of a heart muscle. In general, infrastructure should not be like that. So we need to flip the narrative. We need to build servers that are secure by default, but they're not. And so I'll talk about some of these bad default settings. And then drift management. Configurations change over time. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't take a very disciplined approach to building cloud infrastructure. DevOps has a manifesto, and that one of the manifestos of the DevOps practice is that you should you should treat your infrastructure like cattle, not like pets. And this idea here is that it's not like, oh, this is Fluffy and this is my favorite web server, and I've configured Fluffy to be very well performing, to handle load when there's a lot of traffic, and I've patched it, and it's not like that. It should be like caring for a pet. You shouldn't have names for these things. You should destroy and slaughter your infrastructure repeatedly using something called infrastructure as code, IAC. You should be committing to a repository and using Terraform or Ansible or other tools to deploy that infrastructure through scripts. And you don't log into console and install a machine and then apply patches to it. That's the old way of doing things, like back in the 90s, right, when I was building Starbucks and PlayStation. Nowadays, with cloud, you should be deploying from a repo. No one should be logging into production. And so that's one of the things, configuration drift. Two servers that were built on the same day, they may not have identical configurations a month or a year later. Somebody goes in and changes one of them, they forget to change the other, or other types of reasons that configuration can drift. So although AWS CloudTrail, like I said, is enabled by default, it only retains logs for 90 days. Does that match your data retention and requirements policy? On the next slide, I'm going to mention some specific non-default Azure settings for Microsoft's cloud. But for configuration drift, incident responders, they commonly remark that security groups and firewall rules were added for debugging, but never got turned off. So they might have an any rule, which lets in any traffic on any IP address. And that's one of the things that incident responders often find. People are touching production configurations, network configurations, firewall configurations by hand instead of through code. And so they're modifying things, troubleshooting, making sure everything works. And then they forget to turn off this sort of promiscuous rule that lets anyone talk to them, which allows hackers to have a field day. So with Azure, definitely step away from the defaults. So they allow, by default, legacy authentication methods and legacy protocols. So here we're talking about POP3 for email, IMAP also for email, and SMTP for email. Those are typical protocols that are turned on across all Azure tenant accounts. And guess what? The username and password are transmitted in the clear, aka unencrypted, which means they can be snooped, sniffed, and recorded and logged. That's not good. That's not a good default at all. And then the legacy authentication methods. Microsoft, I'll get to that in a second, but Microsoft really loves to be backwards compatible with people that like maybe joined their cloud services 5 years ago, and they didn't have good defaults then, and they still don't have good defaults. Configure email security controls. Here I'm talking about DMARC, SPF, and DKIM. I'll talk about what those mean in the next slide. Or 2 slides from now. And then, of course, Azure key delete and purge protections, right? These are not turned on. There's a great tool, again, link is in the slide notes, called Purple Knight, like purple team, right? Combination of red team, blue team. That's where you get purple teaming from. Purple Knight is a tool from Cybersecurity, which basically checks out your Azure Entra ID and Active Directory configurations to see if you have any of the interesting security controls turned on, especially the ones that aren't default, which most tenants never touch when they log into Azure because they think everything's secure by default, but it's not. So anyway, you can run Purple Knight against your infrastructure for free with their community edition, and it reports back. Most companies that do it score about a 60 to 75% coverage, which is not terribly good, right? That's like a C rating. So here's an example of a firm was a year or 2 ago. And IOE is an indicator of exposure. And so it basically checks like 150 or so of these things. And like I said, most first-time scores are pretty bad. And that means that things are not secure by default, certainly not on Azure's infrastructure. step away from the defaults. In this case, 2019, Microsoft began rolling out something called security defaults. Great name, right? To all of their tenants. But in 2023, there was a hybrid identity protection conference in New York City where the then director of identity and access management at Microsoft came to talk. And he spoke and he revealed that only 30% of all Azure tenants, just 2 years ago, had MFA enabled, multi-factor authentication. So they can make these options available to you, but they can't force you to use them. And so they've actually begun to do just that, which is finally, I guess, secure by default. They're rolling through a whole bunch of tenant accounts and just turning on MFA without asking, because people just have never touched their security configs. And they clearly don't have somebody that knows how to do this. And so they're just going to go through and start turning on MFA for everyone. But they still had only reached like 30% of their tenant accounts, which means there's a lot of brute force attacks successful against Microsoft infrastructure. Admins, of course, then have to revoke all of the existing authentication tokens that had been generated prior to turning on MFA, because otherwise MFA can still be bypassed using those tokens. And those tokens are often stored in your web browser or on your laptop or in other servers, and those get compromised and exfiltrated, like happened with Salesforce and several other breaches recently, including the Shai Hulud worm that was stealing credentials out of GitHub repositories. Also a bad practice. Don't copy your personal access tokens, and your authentication tokens, and commit them into your code, into your software repositories. So like I said, even with MFA policy in place, a lot of admins, like I said, are not even nagged to step away from insecure protocols like POP3, SMTP, and IMAP, which is unfortunate. During this conference, I was awarded a emotional support chicken for CISOs, right? We all need emotional support dogs, emotional support pets. This was a squawk chicken. You can squeeze it and let out your stress. So this was in relation to the questions that I brought at the conference. They were rewarding and throwing out the chickens to people that asked good questions. And so I asked about the Storm 0558 breach, which happened in 2023, a few months before the conference. What was it? If you haven't heard of it, if you haven't been a part of it, basically this was Chinese nation-state threat actors that had breached Microsoft's security controls and generated an authentication token that allowed them to read everyone's email, every single user, for every single tenant, for every single client, whether it was personal, private, or commercial, or government. And the breach lasted for 2 months, and it was the US Department of State that discovered the breach. Now, why? Because they had a paranoid admin who was logging something. Oops, where am I? I just switched tabs here. Oh, there we go. I just made my slide notes go away. Let me fix that. All right, here we go. So he was logging something that you can only get when you have an E5 subscription. So if you're familiar with Microsoft subscription, that's not the default. That's like a high-level expensive subscription. And it didn't even log this item called mail items accessed, or this event. So they turned it on. They started logging it. And then they started seeing some really anomalous usage of mail items accessed, as in a Chinese IP address, reading their Department of State's, mailboxes. So this particular query is a PowerShell query here for the exact dates during the period in which Microsoft was compromised, and the Department of State as well. So that was a great example of how Microsoft is essentially a national security risk at this point to anyone that uses their cloud platform because of these kinds of mistakes, because of these kinds of breaches. And thankfully, CISA, the Cybersecurity Information Security Agency, went to Microsoft and said, look, we can't have people have to pay extra to see events like mail items accessed, which were abused and could have been detected sooner had everyone had access to it. So anyway, this is the coveted emotional support chicken and the hybrid identity. Configure email security controls. So remember I talked about DMARC, SPF, and DKIM. So DMARC is domain-based message authentication, reporting, and conformance. And unfortunately, studies show that 71% of all domains, right, whether it's the PhiladelphiaEagles.com, which I was using in my presentation yesterday here in Philadelphia, the football team, they have a policy that says none, which essentially no protection. DMARC is there to declare which servers you use to send email. And anyone can then just reject or emails that pretend to come from your domain that don't come from those servers. So it's a combination of SPF, Sender Policy Framework, and DMARC that allow you to basically not have your emails be spoofed. So that protects your customers. That protects your users because someone can't send an email to an buyer and say, hey, I need you to buy me some Google Play Store cards, scratch off the backs and send me pictures of those because I want to hand them out at a meeting I'm in right now. This is a very common CEO scam and fraud that's perpetrated either through SMS or email. And of course, they don't have the right to send an email from your domain name, and they're not using the correct email address of your CEO. But people don't look at the headers or at the details and hover over the mail message sometimes. So you don't even want that email to show up in someone's mailbox. And if you had DMARC, SPF, and DKIM turned on and configured properly, not in a none policy, which is what's shown here. So they have a DMARC record, but they didn't set it to be quarantine or reject. Quarantine means the emails that come from unauthoritative servers for your emails get put into the spam or the junk folder, and therefore maybe even never looked at. But even harder and stronger and more secure policy is to put that policy to P equals reject. And that way, the emails will never show up, and you don't have to worry about endpoint protection and about people getting scammed and attachments with malware. Anyway, so it's really, really basic, and it's really, really not common. And so a lot of folks really just need to step up and understand how to configure these tools. And it's not like you do a lot after you configure them. Once you've configured them, as long as you don't change how you send bulk emails with Salesforce or SendGrid or tools like that. What's it called? It's one of the tools that people use for bulk email. Anyway, so configure these. These are basics. This is nothing super sexy, but it's really missing from a lot of the world. Let's see, 10:30, an hour in, got half an hour left to go. We're doing well on what I wanted to present. So let me skip over this bit for the moment. This is part of a workshop where I can log into Aikido and show you some things. So I'm going to do that in a minute. But basically, all you need is a GitHub account. We at Aikido don't want a username and a password for you, so we won't even let you create one. So you have to go get a GitHub account. If you already have one, then you can just log in. So let me see if I can change to my screen sharing here and share this tab. All right, let me double check that it looks good on StreamYard. Yeah, okay, cool. I can see the login page. So this is app.aikido.dev, and I just click GitHub to log in. You can log in with Bitbucket for Atlassian or GitLab, but I'll log in with GitHub. And I am now on a demonstration account, right? This is the Roland demo org. And what you see here is that we've had 91 repositories of code, GitHub repos, 34 containers for Kubernetes, 7 different cloud service provider accounts, 1 virtual machine, domain and IP address monitoring for 19, and something called Zen Firewall. And then we also do some stuff like code quality, but I'll talk about that if I have time later. But what you'll see here is that this is a dashboard of all of the risks and vulnerabilities from the code scanning, which is static as well as dynamic and cloud posture management. You can see there's 220 critical vulnerabilities that have been identified, 238 mediums, 338 highs, and 198 lows. And this is across your entire real estate, which is a great view for a CISO to have, a great view for a board to have in terms of providing governance and oversight to the security program, and to say, oh, you guys are doing good, or I don't know, is 220 bad? Maybe it is, so we can look at that trend over time. And this is, again, a demonstration organization that's not really patching its vulnerabilities. We keep it vulnerable on purpose, and we keep populating it with vulnerable code. And we actually use vulnerable repositories. So, for example, if I switch over here and look at some of these resources, which one of them? This one is a vulnerable repo that has vulnerabilities, this critical vulnerability in the Django language or framework. And so this particular one has a CVE, a vulnerability that can be patched, and you can do an auto fix. That's one of the ways that we save people time. It just fixes and upgrades, right? So in this case, you just have to upgrade from version 1.2 to 1.4.11. And it'll make the pull request for you, commit it to the repo, and you're good. You have an audit trail. This one's 99 out of 100 criticality. Can be exposed because of these vulnerabilities, and you can look at the reachability to confirm can be exploited. Not every vulnerability that is in a scanner result can be exploited. And what's important to note there is this this upper right-hand corner here, we have the number of hours that were saved. So in this case, it's 1,854 hours have been saved by Aikido scanning and knowing that there's certain vulnerabilities that can't be exploited and they're ignored. And you don't have to get every critical that exists. This saves time. This saves the engineers from being frustrated by going and patching vulnerabilities that couldn't be exploited or can't be reached. So in this case, there's like 1,000 vulnerabilities that have been ignored, and in this case, 958 resolved in the last 19 resolved in the last 7 days. Anyway, so we're trying to make it easier for developers to develop secure code. That's the basics here. And if we look at some of the things for repository scanning, there's a bunch of checks, right? And like I said, some of these are intentionally vulnerable repositories so that we have meaningful demos, right? Meaningful code base for people. But this would typically be your company's code, and you'd be wanting to know, if you have this Java demo that you built, you don't want your Spring framework to cause a breach. So in this case, we're looking at getting onto the latest version. Instead of 4.3.6, you should get to 6.2. And this is a particular task that then you could assign to someone, the actions here. And you can adjust the severity, you can run the scan if you've updated it. Anyway, so these are some of the ideas involved in static code analysis and scanning code repositories. When we look at cloud, though, one of the interesting things about cloud, we have here several cloud accounts. This one's an Azure account for a staging environment. And in this case, you can look at the types of checks that are run across that cloud account. And in this case, there's a bunch of compliant checks. That's great. And if we wanted to look for a specific check, we might look for logging and to see, our logging, is it logging enabled? And if it's not, the Aikido scanning of that cloud account can detect it for you and alert it here. If you look at the particular issues in this particular test account, maybe I'll switch accounts here and look at this one that's like Google. No, actually, let's go with a mixed AWS. So in this case, we have some issues, right? And we look at the checks. Again, we can look at logging, and we can see VPC flow logs are not enabled is one of the checks. CloudTrail is not enabled is one of the other checks. And here, it's not compliant. So that's how we should go and fix it. In this case, it may not have a fix. It may not actually do the fix for you, but in some cases it can. So it has a pull request open. And pull request is a part of GitHub repositories to look at this repo. And it's been verified that it'll fix, and you can go and hit the pull request. So if I click on one of these, for example, I don't know, CI/CD Goat. If I switch to sharing this tab, you can actually see a GitHub repository in the Roland demo org. This would be your company name up here, and then your project or code. And it actually shows you what the Aikido fix bot recommended to be, which is to fix these vulnerabilities. And so you have an audit trail, and you can just say merge the pull request, and then you're done. And it only took me, 20, 30 seconds to just review that everything looks good, and then fix the vulnerabilities for the developer. They don't have to go and look at the CVE and try to figure out, oh my gosh, what do I have to do to fix this, right? We have different ways of explaining the fix. So for in this case, we have a Secure Code Warrior subscription. I don't know if you're familiar with Secure Code Warrior, but it's a lovely educational tool, also founded by a company in Belgium, or founded in Belgium. And we have a subscription that we pay for to put these 2-minute videos in here to explain to the developer why you shouldn't have a user.
Hello and welcome to Secure Code Warrior. In this module, we'll be looking at unvalidated redirecting users to understand unvalidated redirects and the trusted
developer
site,
why they're doing
to
something
phishing
wrong,
sites.
right? Because we don't want to just play whack-a-mole and to chase after vulnerabilities, because we can do that, but that's not the efficient way. You want to teach the person to not make those coding mistakes. So let me switch back to this tab. And anyway, so that's education, right? That's the whole goal here. Get developers to be better at developing code, teach to them, explain to them why these cloud assets are at risk and what the vulnerabilities are and how to fix them. So that's a little bit of what I wanted to do with the Aikido security demo piece here. Let me share back to the workshop. And you can log in and get a demo account, fork a vulnerable repository. That's one of the labs that I created in our GitHub repo for education to use for free. And, go to town, right, and learn and see how the platform works, and then eventually it's our wish that people would use it, and go forward with their coding. And we have about 50,000 organizations using the platform right now, and it's only a 3-year-old startup, so very great adoption and uptake. The other thing, I was looking at unrestricted storage buckets in AWS, some of the common things that you can look at, just logging, like I mentioned, but I don't need to jump back over there to show you the rest of these types of activities. There's a lot to see. I'm happy to give people a demo if you'd like one-on-one in the future, if you think this might be something for your organization or for your education program. Let's see, then now all your IAM are belong to us. So this represents a popular Japanese video game called Zero Wing. And I talk about single sign-on, multi-factor authentication, and long-lived credentials. So there's basically 3 types of secrets, right? Managing secrets and credentials is hard. You may have read, I know I have, that there's somewhere on the order of, 30, 40 million secrets inside of GitHub repositories. People commit them in their code, and that is not a good practice. It's not a safe practice. Threat actors can check out a copy of the code and see the credential, the token that's stored in there. I think we have an example of that, actually. Let me see if I can do a quick share this tab. And I think it would be, under containers. And then if I look at checks, well, maybe it's under repositories. So let's take a look for secrets. So yeah, in this case, we have a repo that has a secret in it. And the name of the repo is wrong secrets, right? Just to make it easy for people to find. So let's see, let's look at this one. So in this case, detected an IAM user or role with access rights to an S3 bucket. Maybe this one's be even easier. How do I fix it? Wrong secrets. We would go look at the code and look at autofix. So let's click on the autofix real quick. Apache Maven. PR is open, the pull request is open. So let's take a look and see, check this tab. And so in this case, let's see, critical issue is found in the vulnerability configurations, and it will be fixed if you merge the pull request. This one doesn't give me an example of actually showing me the password that was embedded in the repo, but that's one of the problems that is quite common. Let's see, go back here. I think I ended up closing my presentation, so let me fix that. Share screen, teaching by doing. So anyway, there's lots and lots of risk out there for people with non-human secrets in their repositories, in their code that are reverse engineered or did by reverse engineering by threat actors and abused. And then long-lived secrets. These are forever tokens, and this is the problem with the Salesforce breach that happened recently. It infected, and impacted companies like Ticketmaster and all of these people that use Salesforce. They have these tokens that never expire, and they're refresh tokens that are used for API calls for developers. And when a threat actor gets a hold of them, they can abuse that. They can exfiltrate customer data and sensitive information from those platforms. And then there's also the NPM worm, the Shai Hulud, which stole secrets dynamically as a worm and looked at all the repositories on a workstation or a laptop and went to town, basically replicating itself into all of these other repos. The only reason it wasn't a huge, bigger story or breach than it is because the threat actors used a free account for the target exfiltration URL. And that free account had a limit, and it got hit with so many requests that they shut it down because they thought they were being attacked. And so the threat actor was like embarrassingly successful, right, at running this worm. So I think it was probably just a dry run for another attack later, where they would pay for an exfiltration landing page on a third party. They would publish all of the secrets and all of the details that they were stealing, and not run into like a 100 request limit, right? It wasn't even 100 requests per minute or per second. It was 100 in total. So the whole thing just ran and just basically stopped, at that point, which was good for us, I guess, but very scary to see this kind of thing develop as a threat actors. Last little bit before a little bit of Q&A. And again, I'm not going to jump into this lab, but I do have a static application security testing lab that I've written, Lab 100, and it takes you through how to do a code scan from a command line. So rather than just sort of show you the really cool, portal like I've been showing you with the web page, I wanted to do a scaffolding approach and to show this is what's happening under the hood. And so in this lab, it goes through and talks to you and shows you how to check out a vulnerable repo. There's a link to like 100 different repos that all have vulnerable code. And you basically make a fork of it right into your GitHub account. And then you hook up Aikido and then you scan it. And this lab walks you through all of those tasks so that you can get familiar with this and not just have theoretical knowledge about code scanning and secure development. So the last thing I want to do before our time wraps up is talk a little bit more about the shared responsibility model. In this case, it's like those two keys, in the movies when they want to launch the nukes. Two people more than an arm's length apart have to turn the keys at the same time. Shared responsibility model is a little bit like that. So you have the cloud service provider's key and what they're responsible for. And then you have the customer, you, and what you do with your cloud. So running workloads in the cloud is not inherently more secure, but it's also inherently less secure, right? It's just a different shape of risk. So the last few thoughts I wanted to share about shared responsibility model. The CISO's role, or any information security professional, or anyone that's concerned about security, should think about and define these three areas around cloud service risk. Boundaries of control, who owns what, identity and governance, and then this concept of trust but verify, which you may have heard that phrase before. So boundaries of control. You need to have a precise definition of who's doing configuration, who's doing access management, and who's monitoring the data protection controls. So there's different frameworks that are used to analyze your maturity as an organization. NIST has the cybersecurity framework. CSF version 2 came out recently. There's other versions. Center Internet Security has their top controls, which is 18 control families, with 154 control questions. You answer those controls, and you need to have explicit ownership of who is taking care of it, because you want to have some say, oh, I thought that my cloud service provider took care of this, like logging or monitoring. But no, you have to make sure you turn on the logging and retain them for the right amount of time, as I mentioned. For identity governance, continuous monitoring. You can't just do a pen test once a year. You can't just do an audit of your infrastructure once a year. You need to have continuous monitoring in place. That's something Aikido gives you. That's something that Security Scorecard, where I worked at previously, also gives you for your third parties as well. And then trust but verify. Read the SOC 2 reports. SOC 2 is a control family that's used a lot in the US, Type 1 and Type 2 reports. And all of your cloud service providers have a SOC 2 report. So be prepared to be surprised. Hello, Mike, October 20th outage. So I think of the shared responsibility model as kind of a funky 4-dimensional Tetris block, kind of loosely visualized, there as the attack surface in this image on the page. And you need to, deal with all of the attack surface in all of its dimensions, right? Physical security, processes, encryption, information security, and also cognitive risk. Some of the mistakes that people make, mentally, as they do their jobs. So, for example, Aikido is starting a FedRAMP package, and we're required to provide an application boundary diagram that shows what's in scope and what's out of scope. It's a really good practice to go through, even if you're not applying for FedRAMP authorization. And so you need to have high-level diagrams, data flow diagrams, system-level views of infrastructure in order to do a good job of building and defending against these attackers. both foreign and domestic. And so for continuous monitoring, I like to configure what I call water is wet monitoring. These monitoring tests are to make sure that we're not caught off guard by our assumptions, like Amazon being available all the time. So lastly, here's a little bit about Azure. I pulled down the Azure GovCloud software report, and I looked for the word exception, and there was one. This one popped out for me. So Deloitte is the company that ran this SOC 2 compliance report for Azure's government cloud. And this particular exception popped up where the developers were approving their own Git commits, which is a violation of separation of duties. So configuration management number 2 is that you can't have people approving their own commits. Someone else has to review the code commit, right? And in this case, I think it was the Azure team disclosed like 31 instances where developers were approving their own commits by using separate accounts and basically trying to get their job done faster. So even a well-funded, well-regulated, significant infrastructure provider like Azure GovCloud for the government and for agencies like the Department of Defense and others, or Department of War, I guess it's called now, they have these violations. So that just points out that it's hard to do this. So why do teachers choose Aikido? These are my last couple of slides. We have real vulnerabilities, real tools, hands-on learning, progress tracking. You can create a team. You can invite them to a workspace. So if you have a class of 15 students, you might be able to create 3 teams of 5 and have them compete with each other and log in and look at some of these vulnerable repos. You don't have to use any real code for any company. You can use example code. You can onboard, give them different access controls as you might have in the real world in terms of separation of duties as well. Someone might be a QA type person. Another person might be a release manager kind of role. Then the first scan results come back, and like you saw on the platform on the demo, open source dependencies and supply chain security are all part of what's happening here. You're looking at software composition analysis, what kind of packages are being included in the software, and what kind of dependencies that software has, right? Third party and fourth party risk as well. Cloud security and compliance, it's identifying the misconfigurations, remediating them, verifying the results. In this case, we also have this Zen firewall, which I don't have time to dive into, but it's an in-app firewall. So rather than a perimeter firewall, you actually embed like a line of code and this open source project that we created. So it's available to you for free. It's called Zen Firewall, available in 7 different languages: PHP, .NET, Node.js. And we have an interest in helping deliver training, like I said, for software development, comp sci classes, as well as cybersecurity classes and training. And maybe the first week you might just initiate a scan, and then we suggest maybe the second week you look at dependencies analysis, SDA, and those examples. Then maybe look at reachability, which vulnerabilities can and cannot be exploited, and that's where we help prioritize and keep you from chasing vulnerabilities that don't matter and save time. And then work on the auto fix, right? So this would be an example like 4-week, kind of like 4 modules spread across, 4 weeks of class. So start your education journey today. Feel free to reach out to me and to Aikido to connect a demo repository, invite your students, and run your first scans. So here's that promised QR code, or just send an email to mwilkes@aikido.dev, and I will send you a copy of the deck, and you'll have all of the hyperlinks and all the examples from my presentation today. So with that said, I think what I can do is keep this on screen, and I'll jump over to the streaming session and see if there's any questions that have been thrown into the chat that you'd like me to answer. I think I can look in the comments section. Let's see. Yeah, I see a couple there. From yeah, what are your biggest challenges universities face when it comes to teaching cybersecurity? I like to think that they need to defend themselves first, right? Because most universities have large swaths of IP addresses. Like Columbia University has like a class A, right? There's tons of attack surface. And they only have like 2 or 3 people to protect it. And every professor thinks that they're a cybersecurity administrator and expert. and they do whatever they want. And so that's the challenge in my mind, is that universities need to defend themselves first, and to defend themselves well. Columbia was breached in July of this year through a threat actor that wanted to dig up some dirt on Mandami, the mayoral candidate for the city of New York. And they exfiltrated, the threat actors exfiltrated 10 years of application data from the students. And it was not a good look, for Columbia. So really learn how to defend yourself first, and then start teaching classes on it, and not just book learning people, right? Get some practitioners on staff. That's definitely a best practice. Let's see, Pablo Enrique, in your opinion, what's the best way to build a cybersecurity career, considering it's not always an entry-level roles available? Yeah, I think you need to understand networking. It's like a sailor stepping onto a ship. They need to know how to find the North Star, right? And for me, the North Star for cybersecurity is networking. Everything is networked, right? Our televisions are on the network now, right? Your thermostat in your home, your camera on the front door, everything is internet connected, and all these network protocols and techniques that are used to, protect against abuse has to start at that fundamental level. So they basically get some basic understanding. Play around with Linux, get some free accounts in the cloud. You can get a free tier out of Amazon. You can get $400 worth of Azure bucks, that you can spend and play around with, and do some how-tos and do some readmes and just get familiar with it. Another question, in your experience, what approach has been most effective in engaging non-technical executives with cybersecurity, especially in contexts like Brazil? It's often seen more as a threat. Great question. Non-technical folks, you need to use analogies and metaphors. You can't talk like I did, technical talk in the weeds, as suppose. Their eyes are just going to glaze over, and they're going to go away. I don't want to hear this, And so you really need to think about how to talk about risk in dollar value, brand reputation, and to think about companies like MGM, right, that got hit with an attack, a ransomware attack, and MGM didn't pay the ransom, and they ended up incurring like $100 million in expenses, and they had reputational damage. People couldn't, the slot machines were down. They couldn't check into the hotels. MGM was in a bad way. Caesars got hit with the same ransomware, but they paid it. They paid, I don't know, I think the demand was 30 million. They ended up paying 15. You can usually negotiate ransom down. And it was a cost benefit analysis for the board and say, do we pay $15 million to get the ransom paid and not go down? Or do we do what GM did and say, we're not going to pay the ransom, but we're going to incur $100 million worth of recovery costs and expense and brand damage. Same thing with Jaguar Land Rover. That's an OT breach, right, of their factory infrastructure and their IT infrastructure. So Jaguar Land Rover was down for, I think, 4 weeks, losing 50 million pounds a week, and total costs of about 2 billion pounds to the organization for fines and other things. And the UK government had to bail out all of the suppliers to Land Rover, Jaguar, who couldn't sell parts for 4 weeks into the cars that weren't being made while they were down. That was 1.2 billion pounds. So the cost of mistakes in this regard, the cost of not investing in a good resilience posture and security program, are clearly like 10 to 100x of what it costs to just do security and do it well. And it's not hard. It's email, it's DKIM, right? Like I mentioned, those email protections just to stop. Most breaches start with social engineering and a phishing attack anyway. So if you have MFA turned on and you have logging turned on and you do these basics, like brushing your teeth and flossing, you won't get cavities, and you won't have a loss of your teeth. Business is the analogy here. Anyway, so my approach has always been pretend you're talking about parents. They don't know anything about cybersecurity, and figure out how to talk to them in their own language. So use metaphors, use analogies. That's my favorite way to communicate with the executive team. Let's see what else. Link to the blah, blah, blah. Good morning. Good morning. I don't see any other questions, but if there are any, let's see. I think that was it. So thank you all for your time and attention today. I think I'm finishing exactly on time, maybe 20 seconds left. And hopefully you feel like you want to reach out. I'm on LinkedIn, happy to take a connection request. And the one word I know in Portuguese, obrigado.
Thank you very much. Thank you once again to our speaker for the amazing presentation. Thank you, Mike. And to our sponsors, once again, Levty, Rerun Systems Engineering, and Bitcoin Analytics for their support. All the material shared by Mike will be uploaded to the event's website, and his email is right there, as he mentioned. Thank you all for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the session.
Cheers.